Herzlich willkommen zu 99:1 Zwischenmahlzeit. Heute besprechen wir Israel, Palästina und die Corona-Impfstoffe, Covid-Impfstoffe und die Situation und Lage rund um die Impfstoffe und Covid an sich in Israel und Palästina. Für alle Leute, die des Englischen nicht so mächtig sind, wir werden gleich auf Englisch sprechen. Das geht leider bei diesen internationalen Interviews nicht anders. Aber falls ihr Fragen habt, könnt ihr gerne über die Comments sowohl in YouTube als auch in Facebook Fragen stellen. Und wir werden uns der Fragen dann annehmen, wenn sie passen. Und ihr könnt auch gerne Kommentare reinschreiben. Ist immer gern gesehen, dass so ein bisschen Interaktion auch stattfindet. Jo, und dann legen wir doch einfach direkt los. Ich hole jetzt mal Ghada und Majed in den Chat. Hello, Ghada. Hello, Majed.
Hello, everybody. Hi.
Come to
Nadim. Hi, everyone.
Hi,
welcome
everyone.
to 99:1. I'm very happy that you're with us today to talk about this topic. A very important topic for me personally, and I think in Germany in general, to get an overview there. What is going on and how can we understand certain news that we are hearing in Germany? Before we start, before I give a short intro why I even want to talk about this with you guys, I would like to do a short introductory round so everybody knows who you are. I will start with Ghada and I will give a short introduction about her and you can tell me if I'm correct. Ghada Majadli is the director of the Occupied Palestinian Territory Departments at Physicians for Human Rights Israel. It's called PHRI, and it focuses on promoting the right to health in the occupied territory and proper access to medical care by challenging and documenting Israeli practices affecting the right to health and health state in occupied Palestine. Since the outbreak of COVID-19 in Palestine, PHRI, the organization she's working with, has been leading a campaign joined by international and local organizations to urge the Israeli authorities to live up to their legal obligations and ensure that quality vaccines be provided to Palestinians living under Israeli occupation and control in both the Westbank and the Gaza Strip. There has also been a statement in December signed by 31 international Palestinian and Israeli organizations that she also participated in, to the Israeli authorities, urging them to do so. Ghada, have I missed anything? Is there something that you want to say for your introduction?
No, thank you, Nadim, for the introduction.
Great. Majed, how about I give this to you completely and you tell us who you are and what you're doing.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm the international director of We Are Not Numbers, and I do my PhD on vulnerability with the Palestine Research Group in the University of Tampere. I'm actually a refugee from the Gaza Strip. I moved to Berlin and I live right now between Berlin and Tampere and Zurich. I'm politically active in the Palestine solidarity movements in different places, and I led and co-led many campaigns around, and I'm glad to be here talking about Palestine and Israel and the medical apartheid that Israel is increasingly establishing in the increasingly vulnerable Palestinian area. Thank you, Nadim, for inviting us. I'm happy to be with Ghada today.
Great, thank you, Majed. So let me give a short introduction as to why I wanted to why it was important for me to talk about this. So what we have been noticing in Germany since the very beginning in terms of the vaccine release is that everything here in terms of vaccination is going incredibly slow. There are various reasons for that are political. Maybe there is some corruption going on, or maybe just some incompetence going on. But what we're seeing is that even by now we have I think less than 10% of the population vaccinated. And at the same time, there has always, even since January already, always been this gaze to Israel from the German media landscape, talking about, oh, look at Israel, how great they are and how fast they vaccinate everyone there. This is how we should do it. And while I know the situation a bit better, of course, I got super annoyed by this and got super frustrated also with the fact that there is no alternative reports on this information, on this particular situation in Israel, in Germany at least. So this is what I want to provide now with you guys. in order to get there, maybe I would ask my first question to Ghada to explain a little bit about the general Corona situation in Israel. How did Israel react to the Corona pandemic? What was their reaction in terms of vaccines, and how can we even explain the situation and that is, I mean, objectively true that at least Israeli citizens have been vaccinated to a already huge amount. How was that possible for them to do it that fast? And what were the underlying motivations there to outrun other countries in this sense?
Yeah. Thank you, Nadim, for the introduction. I guess that everybody heard about Israel being the country, a leading country in its vaccinating campaign. Today, more than half of the population got vaccinated, at least with the second vaccine. All of the population got the Pfizer vaccine, and Israel was among the first, if not the first, country to reach a deal with Pfizer company. And media reported that Israel paid double the market price in exchange to share all the data and the medical information of Israeli citizens with Pfizer. Actually, a couple of days ago, one of the Israeli channels interviewed the CEO of Pfizer company, and they wanted to understand why Israel, why the agreement was signed with Israel. And actually, he said he provided some important information, saying that, first of all, he was very impressed with Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, obsession and enthusiasm. He said that he called him in irregular times at night, asking for vaccines and asking, what about children? What about pregnant women? And he said also that Israel was, a convenient choice, first because of the population, and second because of its health system, which is a good health care system. And I think the last one, which he didn't say, is that I guess Israel was the only country to agree for the condition, which means that they will be providing statistical information in exchange for vaccines, which raised troubling ethical and legal questions in Israel. And there's an ongoing public discourse about Netanyahu's conduct around vaccines. There are a lot of theories regarding why Netanyahu was very obsessive, and why Israel actually paid double the market. And many people think that this is due to the charges against Netanyahu and because of the upcoming elections. So yeah, this is basically the situation in Israel.
So basically, just to sum this up, so we have a situation in which Israel is able to get a whole lot of vaccines, much more than other countries, because of two facts. First, they pay double the price than the market standard. And second, they agreed with a quite unique data transfer agreement with Pfizer, which basically promised Pfizer to give them any kind of research and like data in general of the vaccinations and how they develop probably also in patients, for Pfizer to be able to use that data in order to probably create better vaccines. That is something, just to give a context here, that is something that is completely unthinkable in Germany regarding the privacy laws in Germany. I mean, if something like this happened, this would be an outcry. I think it would actually be against the law. but there would be also an outcry in terms of people on the streets. How was the reaction there? You already alluded to this a little bit, that this was also regarded not something
as I said,
widely
it was
accepted.
public. There is an ongoing public discourse, but many Israelis are getting vaccines, which means that we can say that there are two things: public discourse, but also some sort of accepting this reality in Israel by becoming, a real-time laboratory for Pfizer. So, I think there are two voices actually in Israel.
And last but not least, you were then talking about how there could be, or there is alluded that there is some kind of motivation coming, or an electoral motivation coming from Netanyahu, also based on the fact that he's facing charges. I am aware what you're talking about, but I'm not sure whether our listeners are. So can you please just in 1 or 2 sentences give a short summary? What charges is he facing, and what kind of danger is this posing to him actually?
Nadim?
I froze up for you.
Yeah.
Is it better now? Better now? Ghada, hello? Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, now I hear you.
All right. Then I'll try again. Can you please just give a short summary on what you meant by charges? You were talking about Netanyahu is facing some charges. Many people here don't know that. What does this mean, and what kind of danger do they pose for him?
Yeah, it is mainly bribery charges. I don't have actually more details about the charges because I haven't been really following Netanyahu's trials, but he was on trial, and he has his first discussion in the court last week or 2 weeks ago. So it is bribery charges, and his situation, like in terms of legal situation, is is bad, but still we see that Israelis are still gonna vote for Netanyahu, and he's gonna get majority of the voter voices in the upcoming elections.
Okay, great. Thank you. Majed, we barely ever hear anything about the Corona situation in Gaza and the Westbank. So maybe we start with the situation in Gaza, in Gaza. Can you give us a short overview? So I remember reading one of your posts in the last year when the first case arrived there. So how did that develop? What's the current situation in Gaza regarding COVID?
Following what Ghada's said, how Palestinians become an object of elections and objects of only certain far right and very Zionist politicians who thinks of Palestinians as objects of political, as an objects that they just think of it on political decisions, such as with the issues with Gaza. First, like they in December we heard, all of us, that Israel have been praised by many entrepreneurs in the world that they were the fastest to vaccine its people. Actually, by December they had over 1/3 of their people were vaccines, while the Gazans and the people in the West Bank also, they have not been they were fighting to get their vaccines in to the Palestinian territories, and also other on the other hand, which Ghada will say much more about it, how the vaccine distributions was kind of comes from a racist backgrounds or an apartheidic structural backgrounds when it comes to them also vaccinating more Ashkenazi Jewish actually than forgetting about the Palestinians who live, or other minority groups living inside Israel. Where us comes as last to remember, if we should be remembered, it always comes with a political pressures and international human rights organization asking Israel to obey to humanitarian law and international law, which Israel did that after 2 months, actually. Yani when it comes to Gaza, the place I know very well, when in December they already vaccines 1/3 of their community, Gaza receives its own first vaccinations in the 17th of February. That's actually, Nadim, up to 2 days after a huge fights between the EU and like politicians, you know, and international human rights organizations fighting that it's only with 2,000 doses coming through the PA, which is a Russian vaccine. 2 days which cost a lots of efforts of logistical sustaining at the fences and the borders in the blockaded coastal Gaza to come into Gaza. So when this kind of intensified the corona crisis, because Israel saw Gaza from the beginning actually as we don't want to give them vaccine. If we want to give them vaccine, actually there was a discussion that we don't need to give them a vaccine, and if we want to give them vaccine, we have to exchange the vaccine with the Israeli soldiers, and that's a ridiculous, a very inhumane, very against international law decision or even thoughts. And that comes to the moral responsibility that Israel actually forgets with the territories and the people that they occupy, you know, and where they are complicit in with their moral responsibility from that from that positions, because they saw their position actually as they didn't see us. They didn't want to see us. For them we were the invisible populations that we don't have to care about until people remember through this crisis that Palestinians actually are screaming again and again and again, and therefore comes to the idea of medical apartheid that has been actually all over. Speaking of Israel, structural violence and infrastructure violence that has been embedded through all the efforts to vaccine the Palestinians, you know, and with every step Israel show its criminal natures when it comes to treating Palestinians. It's how they intensify every crisis to be a 10-time crisis. And there we see, as Ghada's mentioned, I believe that almost to vaccine someone in Israel, it's more likely 60 times to be vaccinated in Israel than to be vaccinated in the Palestinian territories. And that's exactly this kind of game shows very well that even though those places are very vulnerable, Gaza actually is the most vulnerable out of it. They have only received about 2,000 vaccine 2 months and a half after Israel. That only tells a lot about how Israel doesn't see and don't want to see and don't want to be responsible or of the Palestinians.
And to be clear, I mean, that was already months after the first accusations towards medical apartheid were levied at Israel, and doctors speaking out from all over the world actually against the situation.
Exactly.
What is the situation now? How do you know how much is there? What's the situation in Gaza in the first place? So I have some information on this personally, but to be honest, in Germany, we know nothing about this. We don't know how hard Gaza was hit by COVID. We don't know if the spread is very big or if it's very little, if a lot of people are dying. So can you give us a picture just so that we have an image on what's going on there?
Actually, we have to remember Gaza medical infrastructure is actually hit not one time, hit in the last 12 years about 10 times, with all the massacre that Israel committed in 2008, 2009, 2012, and 2014, plus all the bombardments that Israel is already established and attacking many medical infrastructures and also other infrastructure in Gaza, didn't allow the Palestinians to stand on their leg. And actually, the medical, I could say the medical infrastructure, the hospital and all the medical supply is actually disabled in Gaza before the COVID crisis, and COVID came COVID intensified completely the crisis, and it exceed the vulnerability of the strip exceed any time which the people have ever experienced. it shuttered its economy, it shuttered its hospital. Their medics were actually crying in their hospitals because they couldn't actually help. You know, the ventilator was it's a huge shortage in ventilator, oxygen, medical supplies to support the people. Actually, you know that we have many people with rare diseases and disease, like we have medical needs. People who, as Ghada would mention a lot about the aspects that people all the time in Gaza, hundreds are bleeding to go out of Gaza, to get a permit to go out of Gaza through any of its fences, to get a treatment outside of Gaza because we don't have enough medical supplies. And that tells a lot about how COVID came as a huge slap. It's kind of another actually massacre, you know, like actually it's a slow violence that is people are experiencing. But actually, lucky Gaza, the only luck things that Gaza has, that its own people, there are about 60% of the people who live inside are young people, and that makes it makes the spread of the COVID-19 a bit less than other places. But still, there are a huge amount of people with medical needs, not because of COVID, because of many other things. Therefore, it makes Gaza actually one of the most vulnerable places in the world, if not the most vulnerable places. The most vulnerable place actually exists in the planet. But you know, actually, people normalize the situation in Gaza a lot, and they kind of get normal to Germans, to other Europeans, that Gaza is always under attack. Gaza is always difficult situation. And the global South, actually, with Gaza, that's a situation. There's still a lot about the stark inequality that Gaza and other people in the global South have to endure in the midst of this pandemic, where the global North and people in places such as Israel would get vaccinated, while those in the neighborhood, they will not, because they are not from the same ethnic group, actually, which is actually starking, like it's shocking. And I'm really shocked that this is morally can exist in 2021.
Great. Thank you, Majed. Ghada, can you put this maybe into some context and give us some numbers on also what's going on in Westbank, and in what way did vaccines arrive there? When did it happen, and to what extent has it solved the problem there already, or hasn't it?
Yeah, actually, it's very good that we are having this discussion today, not to maybe 2 weeks ago, because then the situation would be very different. The occupied territory, and I'm talking about both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, is witnessing a severe increase of a number of infections and deaths since the outbreak of the virus, since March last year. And you know, this happened after months of restrictions on the movement of the population in the occupied territory, lockdowns, and nightly curfew for 2 weeks in the West Bank recently. That did not bring any improvement, but quite the opposite. There has been cases spike in the past couple of days. Actually, the number doubled itself in the occupied territory. The virus is spreading widely and quickly. And the health ministry spokesperson actually said 2 days ago that there has been nothing like this since the beginning of the pandemic. And as the situation deteriorating in terms of a number of active cases and infections, some hospitals are at full capacity. Even some hospitals are more than full capacity, which means that this limits the access to healthcare for other patients with other health problems. And it means also more restrictions on the movement of patients, both in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. And only last week, 2 hospitals in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem have announced that, for example, cancer patients from the Gaza Strip cannot be admitted to hospitals in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. And we're talking about treatment which is unavailable for oncology patients in the Gaza Strip. Now, if I say, for example, 27 deaths in the past 24 hours, I think that people won't understand what is the the meaning of 27, because we know about larger numbers of deaths, but if we want to compare it to the population, then this number is high. And also, what we should note here is that the chances that a coronavirus patient in the occupied territory die of coronavirus, mainly because of the state of the healthcare system in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, is 50% more than a coronavirus patient in Israel. So we are now in a situation where there is no campaign in a large scale that can meet the needs of the population. Only 2,000 vaccines have arrived to the West Bank, and the other agreements with the Pfizer or with the COVAX and with the Chinese government, we don't have a schedule for when these vaccines will arrive. But in the Gaza Strip, actually, the situation is better in terms of vaccines, because the EU sent 2 shipments, but it wasn't through the PA and it wasn't through Israel, but through the Rafah crossing and Egypt to the Hamas government. And now, if I'm not wrong, they sent 20,000 the first shipment, and another 20,000 in recent days. So this is the situation right now.
So about those 2,000 vaccines that have reached the West Bank by Israel's hands, right? They went through the PA. So who is getting those vaccines? Probably the PA is distributing them. To what? Like, is this in any way transparent? Do we know how they are deciding this, or?
Yeah. So Israel. First of all, I will start from the beginning. In January or in February, the PA. Through the World Health Organization, sent an appeal to the Israeli authorities asking for vaccines only for medical staff, Palestinian medical staff, because of because this population is at high risk. And at the beginning, Israel denied the request. But later on, with the pressure from the World Health Organization and the international community, and the pressure of human rights organization, both Israeli, Palestinian, and international organization, Israel has agreed to send 200 vaccines to medical staff, which is nothing. And we don't know for what staff and what is the policy in terms of allocation in the West Bank, but we know that they have criteria. They first they want to vaccinate the elderly, and then medical staff, and then people at risk. And later on, Israel agreed, and it was mainly because of the pressure of medical professionals in Israel. Agreed to send 5,000 vaccines of Moderna that they had. Israel had 100,000 Moderna vaccines that they didn't know what use to do with it, because they had an agreement with Pfizer that according to this agreement, all the population in Israel, including illegal settlers in the West Bank, will be vaccinated with the Pfizer.
Wow,
So,
it was an exclusivity agreement, so they were not allowed to use any other vaccine.
Yes,
wow.
exactly.
Okay.
So they had 100,000 Moderna vaccine with no use at all. And in the cabinet Corona, medical professionals urged and recommended the political level to vaccinate Palestinians, mainly for epidemiological reasons, because for community immunity, all the area from the river to the sea is one epidemiological unit. So they urged the Israeli authorities, the coordinator of the government activities in the occupied territory and the defense ministry to vaccinate Palestinians. So what they did, they said, okay, we're going to give medical staff 5,000 vaccines of Moderna, which means that this can be enough for only 2,500 medical personnel. And Israel referred and transferred only half of this amount until now. So they said, we're going to give them 5,000 Moderna vaccine, but they transferred only half of it. And what happened then is that the PA, which was supposed also to deliver some of the vaccine that they got to medical personnel and medical staff in Gaza, were not allowed by Israel. Like, Israel prevented the PA from delivering and transferring Moderna vaccines to medical staff in the Gaza Strip because of the political situation, and that they wanted to exchange vaccines and aid, what they call aid to Gaza with the soldiers. So I think that what happened recently was incredible, because on the one hand, the Israeli Ministry of Health and Israel kept saying that according to the Oslo Accord, Palestinians, the PA is responsible for health in the West Bank and in, of course, in the Gaza Strip, because it's the Hamas government, and that Israel has no responsibility at all for vaccinating Palestinians. And if they're gonna, provide any vaccines, then this will happen only after they vaccinated all the population, and this is gonna be seen as humanitarian gesture. But what happened almost 1 month ago is that the Israeli Knesset, members of the Israeli Knesset, had a discussion whether Israel should allow the delivering of vaccines to the Gaza Strip, whether it was donated to the PA by Arab countries, European countries, or whether it was vaccines that Israel provided. So this discussion, like in the one hand, they say we are not responsible at all. The Palestinian Authority is a sovereign state and independent state. They are responsible for the health of Palestinians. But on the other hand, in the same discussion in the same room where the Ministry of Health the Israeli Ministry of Health was present, and political parties and representation of different offices, they were discussing whether Israel should allow the delivering of vaccines to people in Gaza. So this is insane. And what happened is that when the PA delivered the first shipment, which was 2,000 vaccines, not Moderna, the Russian vaccine, because Israel prevented the delivery of vaccines, Moderna vaccines, Israel denied at the beginning the request, and the shipment went back to the PA. And one of the reasons was because they said like they submitted a different request. It wasn't a request for vaccines, but the main reason was because Israel, the state of Israel, was supposed to give an answer to a petition that was submitted to the High Court, the Israeli High Court, by the Golden family, that they asked that Israel prevent any kind of delivery of vaccines to Gaza until soldiers are, until bodies of soldiers are back in Israel.
So basically use the vaccine as a negotiation.
Yeah, but that the state of Israel couldn't, in their first, answer to the petition to the court, they said that there has been no decision yet, an official decision, whether Israel will be, allowing the delivery of vaccines to Gaza Strip. And even during this discussion, the state of Israel did not give any, clear answer or, a decision regarding the allowing of vaccines to the Gaza Strip.
Okay, yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
Maybe I give, like, in this context, I give a question to both of you, like, openly, and you can just see who's first to answer. So when you just explained this, Ghada, I'm always like, my question comes to my head is what's their interest in doing this? Because like you said, right, epidemiologically, it makes sense to take care that the whole area is vaccinated, because this area is densely populated. Even like if we're talking about the Westbank, it's even densely populated by Israeli citizens. So they will be in close contact and proximity to the virus there. And if you don't vaccinate the whole area, you will eventually have the virus spill back into your supposed own area, right? Own country. So one would think that that there would be some reason for them to actually take care of vaccinating everyone there. And it seems so irrational, even for Israel. Like, even if we suppose everything that Majed said before, maybe ideology, racism, state of colonial mind, etc., playing into this, it still is so rational in terms of self-interest. What Israel is doing there. So how do you explain this? Where is this coming from, this kind of behavior? And
Nadim, you are frozen, so I don't know if you finished asking the question. I can start answering now.
Okay, go ahead.
Majed, I hear you. You can tell me.
Okay, now maybe I just wanna mention one important things of what Nadim is pointing out. I think it's critical also for us to imagine the political, actually larger situation of Palestine, Israel. Actually, Palestine is completely, Palestinian Israelis are all in under the same law, which is the Israeli law. And as we are occupied, it's their responsibility, legally and morally, to take care of the Palestinians, and take care of those who are under their roof. But this when it comes, and that's why when it comes to seeing a pandemic, there is a different pandemic for those who are really who live inside Israeli territories, and there is another pandemic for those who live inside Israel, like a under Palestinian administration, let's say. However, the Palestinian administration is under the Israeli administration, and that's what set the medical apartheid actually from a very structural point of view. I always imagine Israel is managing crisis. It was always managing crisis. Actually, in Gaza, if anybody would remember, they were counting calories for people in Gaza. And that was many researchers, how Israel was managing the population of Gaza, managing the crisis of the people of Gaza. And that tells a lot about the nature of why such conversation in the Knesset that that Ghada have mentioned exists. Because if we have to very much imagine the racist, Zionist ideology nature that doesn't see Palestinian. We have to imagine how this also Zionist ideology, we can speak of many racial justice issues. We can speak of many like apartheidic structural violence and slow violence and speedy violence and so on. But we have to imagine that Israel is also managing how vulnerable, or how can we keep those people in need of us. How can we keep them under a control where they always in need to us? We don't have to make things easy. Actually, with the doses that the PA the 2000 that Ghada mentions, at that time, that 2000 doesn't do anything to 12,000 medics in Gaza, you know. So imagine, that's the other doses, the 20,000 which came from Emirate. It came 2 weeks after or 3 weeks after. So that doses that the BA sent, which took it has 2 days, were waiting at the fences of the Israeli fences, because Israel doesn't want these doses to come to Gaza, and they want the Palestinians to beg for it, you know, and they want the international community to say, yeah, please let them enter. And this is it's a strategy. It's a strategical. It's the same ongoing Nakba that Israel was responsible of more than 73 years ago, and they are continuing by creating a more Nakba, where the Nakbatizing of our everyday life became the norms of how they manage our community, whether with vaccine or whether with doses or whether with how they respond to any of the pandemic or non-pandemic settler violence, or with their attack to different villages, or how they manage the ghettos of the people who live in the West Bank, how they manage the 15-16 years of blockade in Gaza. We have to understand the nature of Israel, which Israel, we also have to understand this is not far right. This is, I myself, as someone who coming from Gaza, lived there, have really suffered to leave Gaza after it took me 2 years to leave Gaza, as someone who was shot also while planting olive trees, while I was not of any danger to an Israeli soldiers. But we are part of this game, shot to play. They shot me just as a game, as the same game that they are playing with everybody to manage this kind of very gross, very striking, actually, apartheid that have never existed, even in South Africa, actually, you know, or even with the African American also treatments.
And that's actually a note that came by one of the leaders of the ANC, the African National Council, when he was asked about the comment for the medical apartheid. He said that medical apartheid we didn't even have in South Africa back then. So that's something to notice. But I want to give the same question to Ghada, and maybe give some other points on, because for me I understand what Majed is getting to. It's basically saying that there is there's basically racism and ideology at work, a nationalist ideology that is pushing certain people to react in a more inhumane or unhuman, really, way to other kinds of people. But what is puzzling for me here is that this decision goes against their own interest, and that's the thing that I'm trying to make sense of. And I have a proposition on my own, but I would like first to maybe Ghada speak about this for a second.
Okay. So thank you, Majed. I think that Majed brings, some kind of analysis and explanation about Israel's historical conduct towards Palestinians. And I want to say that we have to understand the political environment in Israel, and that there is an election in maybe a week or 2 weeks, and that the public discourse in Israel is in favor of not giving aid for Palestinians. So, as I said, we have the Golden Family petition to the High Court that their son is in Gaza, the body of their son. And there's a public discourse around. It's not only the far right or the right in the Knesset, but there is recently a shift also. It was always the right dominating the discourse in Israel, but recently we are witnessing a shift to the right, more right, and that Israel do Israel does take into consideration that there is an ongoing movement between Palestinians and Israelis in the occupied territory and inside the Green Line. There are settlers, soldiers, Palestinian patients from the Gaza Strip and from the West Bank to hospitals in East Jerusalem or Israel. And what Israel does is trying to give minimum and to avoid its responsibility. And what is Israel doing now is, for example, after a pressure on the Israeli authorities, they agreed to vaccinate Palestinian workers. And why? Because they understand that they need the Palestinian workers for the economy in Israel. But on the other hand, it took them a lot of time in order to vaccinate Palestinians. At the beginning, they said that they won't be vaccinating any Palestinians. And then they said, we will see if after vaccinating all Israelis, we can consider this. And then they said that they will be vaccinating Palestinian workers. And then they said, we're going to vaccinate all statusless persons in Israel, but we were going to exclude Palestinians from the group of statusless persons. So although Palestinians, in Israel, statusless Palestinians are part of the, the population. If you don't vaccinate them, then you cannot reach community immunity. Then you can understand that there is some, racist ideology behind the Israeli practices. But as I said, Israel hopes to be able to isolate Palestinians in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. And it's more easier to isolate Palestinians in the Gaza Strip because of the closure and because of the recent restricted criteria for obtaining the permit for Palestinians in Gaza. I don't know if everyone watching us now knows that a Palestinian in Gaza or Palestinian in the West Bank, in order to move between Palestinian territories and East Jerusalem, they have to obtain the Israeli permit in order to do so. And this is one of the, major tools of Israel to control and manage the population in the occupied territories. So in Gaza, they have an ability to isolate them and to not care for the immunity of the population in Gaza, because they can restrict the movement between Gaza Strip and the rest of the world because of the siege. But in the West Bank, it is it's not realistic to think that Israel can isolate them and not to worry for the immunity. For example, the Israeli army, they got the vaccines. They are immune now, the Israeli army. The soldiers can go into Palestinian villages in the West Bank, raid homes, detain Palestinians, but they are immune. They are not in danger. But for settlers going into Palestinian villages and Palestinian workers coming to Israel, it is necessary in order to reach immunity in Israel. But as I said, they hope that this can be done with minimum intervention and responsibility that Israel can take on itself as an occupying power, as the one controlling all aspects of life in the occupied territory, whether checkpoint, borders, passage of medications, medical staff, patients, good to the occupied territory.
Great. Thank you, Ghada, and thank you, Majed. I have one thing to add here, and I just wonder what you think about this, and maybe I'm completely wrong with this, but what I see this little parallel to another situation that has really nothing to do with the Middle East. While the pandemic was raging in the US in 2020, I think it was in April or May, there was a lot of talk in the US Senate and in the Congress about proposing stimulus bills and actually giving money to people that are now unemployed
Nadim, I
or
lost
that are
you,
sick.
so I didn't
Okay.
hear that.
Okay, let's give it a second. Majed, did you hear me well?
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Is it better now, Ghada? Do you hear me?
Yeah, now I hear you.
Okay, let's try it again. So I'm trying to draw a parallel just to ask you one question and ask you whether you think I'm on the right track here. So in the US, when they were discussing the stimulus bill in spring 2020, and they were basically discussing whether to give money to people to help them out with unemployment, etc. Mitch McConnell, the leader of the House back then, said something quite revealing. So he said basically, we don't want to give a precedent. Because if we give a precedent in the sense of we show people that we actually can give them money and we can actually help them, after the pandemic, they will keep asking for it. So I'm paraphrasing, but something like that. All right. And I wonder in the case of Israel, whether there is a similar dynamic going on here, and it's even twofold. It's not only that Palestinians or the world would get used to getting help, but it's also about acknowledging actually your responsibility that you have. I have so many discussions with Germans and pro-Israeli Germans in Germany that tell me that Israel is not really occupying Palestine, is not really putting Gaza under a siege, that this is nonsense, that this is propaganda, right? So Israel itself puts out a propaganda that says we are actually not occupying anybody. This is a lie, right? And I wonder if by actually acknowledging your responsibility of having to give them the vaccines, you would then also acknowledge that you are the occupying power, and this is the actual material interest that is hindering them from actually doing this, and why they are fighting this so much, even if it's against their own epidemiological interest. What do you think about that?
I can go first. I think that there is some truth, Nadim, in what you have just said. It's just that the Israeli High Court acknowledged that the West Bank is an occupied territory. Israel, of course, the state denies that the international law applicable in the occupied territory in the West Bank, but this is, this is the situation. But on the one hand, I do agree that if Israel provide vaccines for Palestinians, and we're talking about large amounts of vaccines, then this is kind of acknowledging that Israel is responsible for the health of Palestinians, and Israel does refer all the time, all of the correspondence, our correspondence with the Israeli authority, whether the Ministry of Health or the coordinator of the government activities, the first thing that they mention is that according to the Oslo Accords, the Palestinian Authority is the one responsible and has the authority, to treat and handle exactly. Topics that are related to civilian areas, and health is one of them. But on the other hand, no one can actually, ignore that Israel has extensive control over the Palestinian territories. If a female cancer patient in Gaza needs the approval of Israel in order to get treatment in a Palestinian hospital in the West Bank or in East Jerusalem, then I don't know how Israel is not responsible for health in the territories. If Israel controls whether a Palestinian woman or a man in East Jerusalem or in the West Bank can attend the wedding in East Jerusalem, a family wedding or a funeral, and should obtain the approval from Israel, then I don't know how we can argue that Israel has no responsibility or control. And I think that control brings with it responsibility. As I said, it's not only controlling and managing the population and controlling natural resources and borders. You know, a great example is with the vaccines now. So the PA said in many occasions that they want to secure vaccines for the Palestinians independently without the intervention of Israel. And they said, we're going to get the Russian vaccines, a gift from the Russian government. And Russia sent almost, it was 10,000 vaccines to the Palestinian Authority. And it was kept in Lid airport for weeks. Why? Because first, Israel has to approve the transfer of vaccines to the Palestinian territory. But not only this, the Israeli Ministry of Health had to approve the distribution and the use of the Russian vaccines in the occupied territory, because according to the Paris Agreement, which is part of the Oslo Accords, any imports of medication, drugs, vaccines should be approved by Israeli Ministry of Health for use in Israel and in the occupied territory. And if there is a drug or medication or vaccine that is not allowed for Israelis and it wasn't approved for Israelis, then it cannot be used in the occupied territory.
Mm-hmm.
So how can Israel argue that they are not responsible for the health of Palestinians? And more than this, it's not that they have to approve. It's even that Israel, since the Oslo Accord, they had the same agreements for drugs for Palestinians and Israelis, which means that Palestinians couldn't, have agreements with Arab or Muslim countries for importing drugs, and they had to pay prices for, first world countries. But now Israel is willing, to do, exceptions and to allow the delivery of the Russian vaccines, which wasn't allowed for Israelis, to the occupied territory, which means that also Israel has been using the Oslo Accords, first to for their lack of responsibility, but also they made exceptions when it was convenient for Israel and when it was in their interest, such as, the Russian vaccine now.
Mm-hmm.
So I do understand that Israel does not want to recognize its responsibility, but it's clear to everyone that Israel is responsible for everything that is going on in the occupied territory.
Yes, Majed, you got anything to add there?
I want to add, just to continue what Ghada has mentioned. Actually, as a one from Gaza, as somebody from Gaza, when I fall in love with a woman from Jerusalem, I really can't really live with her in Gaza or in Jerusalem. I have to leave the country completely.
Yes.
And in many places, there is many people who cannot really get married because they are in two different places. Actually, with Gaza, I've dealt with many cases with friends who've been in contact with women or men in different places, and they try to get together and they cannot get together because it's very kind of impossible. The probability of having a permit to cross EINS checkpoint, which is the checkpoint to leave the Gaza Strip through Israel to go to Jerusalem or to the West Bank, it's kind of maybe 0.0001. It's not. It's almost impossible to get it. That is one thing. The second thing is the fact that we have to look at the data in all the places that is happening. When you attack any territories, I think you're responsible of your attack and you have to pay for it. Actually, so Israel, I have some data here written in my notes of massacre 2008-2009. Israel at least has losses and damage in the infrastructure of Gaza between 1.9 to 2.5 billion. In 2014, it was 3.1 billion that Israel has damaged of infrastructure, hospitals, school, and so on. This is in a located area in the most vulnerable spaces that doesn't have anything. Actually, Israel have set a de-development strategy where it's just the state of Gaza and also the West Bank have been all the time in a de-development area. It cannot get developed at all in many. It shuttered every space, you know, and starting, let's say in 2000, let's start from the airport in 2000. Palestinians have celebrated an airport once in their life for 2 years. In 2000, 2001, Israel have bombed it. And when Hamas have taken Gaza, the first thing Israel have done is to bomb the infrastructure of Gaza and mainly the electricity. So they have shut down the electricity on Gaza, which we take also from Israel, you know, and they open actually their sewage into our sea. So our sea is not there for any people to swim inside it. And actually, our water is the most dirty and toxic and contaminated water in the world. I would believe so. So our food is actually insecure completely. All of that because of Israel. If somebody steal your house, you know, it's not the responsibility of you, it's the responsibility of the thief, and those thieves are the Israelis. So this is all just a small examples of how Israel have set an economy which is consumption based economy. Have they reached the Palestinian and all the Palestinians under a full extreme oppression and control and excessive actually control, that they would make it that they are morally kind of and legally responsible, even if anybody would not think they are, because we actually occupied for the last for over 72 years, and the Nakba is continuing, and therefore, yani, if anybody in Germany or any other place don't see that, then he's or she is complicit in all the crimes against humanity that Israel is doing in Palestine, and the crimes against humanity that Israel is being now taken to the ICC, to the International Criminal Court, for these crimes that they are doing. So I think it's clear, and it's actually very clear, and I don't want to. I think Ghada example and my example can say how that is clear enough.
Yes, great, thank you. So I will come to my last question, but anybody that's listening, I see a lot of people watching. If you have any questions or you want to post any comments, please feel free to do so. We will look at them in a minute. But I will just give an open question to both of you, maybe to answer separately. What do you think will be the outlook now? So what are we looking at in the next month, in the next year, in terms of the reality regarding COVID and the vaccines? What can we expect? What has to be done in order to better the situation there? Whoever wants to start.
Go, Ghada, it's fine.
Ghada, you're muted. Yeah, there you
go. I think that what should happen is that vaccines should be arriving immediately to the occupied territory, because, as I said, we are witnessing an increase in recent days, and I said that a number of infections doubled in the past 2 weeks, and we should always remember that. And Majed also said a little bit about it, that the coronavirus met a healthcare system which is not able to meet the needs of the population even before the pandemic. Since the outbreak of the coronavirus, the authorities both in the West Bank and in Gaza Strip have been calling for assistance and support of the international community to secure basic needs to combat the virus. Basic supplies such as gloves and testing kits and ventilators were in shortage in Palestine, and we cannot. I mean, there was support from the international community and from donors, but we cannot expect that the developed healthcare system that has no, strategy at all, because, they cannot, they have no control over water resources. They don't have control over a passage of medical devices and supplies. They don't have enough medical expertise because Israel has been restricting the movement of medical staff in Palestine. So we cannot expect that a healthcare system such as the system in Palestine can, handle in effective way the outbreak of the coronavirus overnight. And when we're talking about vaccines, which is, countries that their situation is even better than the situation in Palestine, and we're not even talking about the state. Occupied territory is not a sovereignty. They don't have any kind of control over not only not security control, but also civilian control. So to expect that the PA alone, even with the assistance of the international community, because each and every country now have their own local challenges and local needs that they need to meet, then we cannot expect that they can support the Palestinian Authority with the vaccine. And we have an example, the COVAX vaccines that should be arrived in the occupied territory haven't yet arrived because there's a list of countries, poor countries. The Palestinian Authority is not the only one. And the AstraZeneca vaccines, which are 2 million, and it was, the large shipment that should have arrived to the occupied territory, apparently will not arrive until April because there is a shortage globally in AstraZeneca vaccines. So to expect that the Palestinian Authority can alone secure vaccines to the population is just unrealistic, and Israel needs to step in because they have a legal obligation according to the First Geneva Convention and according to other international treaties, and because they have a moral obligation, as as the one controls the entire area between the river and the sea, and working to implement separate legal system guaranteeing Jewish privileges while denying the Palestinians from their basic rights, and also exploiting natural and human resources and practicing tools of dispossession, then we cannot argue that Israel has no moral obligations. And we have no choice but to see the issue of vaccines as a distinction and discrimination between two groups in the same area. And we also have to see it as Israel's attempts to prevent vaccines from Palestinians. And as I said, Israel hopes to isolate Palestinians in the occupied territory and give minimum vaccines for Palestinians. But what we should do is to pressure Israel, whether the international community and individual states, to fulfill its obligation towards Palestinians as an occupying power and as the one controlling all aspects of life in Palestine.
Fantastic, Ghada. Thank you. Maybe some words from Majed for the last question, basically. Where do we go from here? What do you think will be our next steps? You're also muted. Take care.
It's always a difficult question. What can we do? I do think Ghada have covered the material matters, which I don't think that Israel is, or we always gonna fight for materialist things, but because we are actually this is how they see of us, that we want food, we want material supplies, like, yeah, we want it, sure, we very much want this, but what we really actually want is the dignified, independent life of the colonial power. And what we really want to end is colonialism and apartheid. We don't want to go through this all the time, going through all this like continuous asking for for the others to ask Israel to put pressures to that for us to get some minimal supplies in, so then we would not be in the media anymore. I think this to make the people, to make us to stop that Palestine are invisible being, invisible bodies, and their spaces is kind of invisible. The refugee camps, they're not there. Us as being recognized as refugees with the right of return, with all those refugees, actually the responsibility of Israel is not only pandemic and COVID and test. There are still over 7-8 million Palestinians all over the world are waiting to come back to Palestine, with the right of return, which is international, according to international law, it should be implemented. But Israel have a huge immunity on all this, even us in the media, Israel, like, you can see that we are invisible. Nobody want to talk about us, but when Israel start to become the leading in vaccinating and logistic, yes, everybody want to talk about Israel because everybody sees Israel as one of their Western, modern, civilized nation, but they don't want to see us because we're not that civilized. They don't want to. They don't feel that we deserve actually the same right, even though if they say it loud. Because what you can see all the time in their statement, I read all the EU statement actually, and I'm following and I'm pushing, pressuring all EU level for years, and I always tell them, you have to stop worrying, you have to act. And all their statements about, we worried about the situation in Gaza, we worried about what Israel is increasingly doing of a criminal act against the Palestinian. This is the same line. I can actually repeat to you the statements which the EU has been doing. Many international organizations trying to, for years, 10 years, the same statements to leave and to end the blockade of Gaza. Some people come to that easy. Let's them control, but make it easy. Don't make it too much. Is this how do we see humanity? And is this how do we see people, human being, should be treated? I think vaccine and COVID shows very well the inequality, the stark inequality that Israel is implanting in through all its control between the river and the sea, and how they see their Jewish people, and settlers are much more important than Palestinians, and they treat us as a 10th class citizen. Actually, it's very clear. People, as I said, it's very clear that people have to see that Palestinians are I'm not saying it to tell you. I'm saying to you to read. Read Richard Falk-Kelly's reports, apartheid report by the UN, that it's an apartheid state. I'm not saying that look at the apartheid statement or position paper that Beit Salem, the Israeli human rights organization, have said, but which we are as Palestinian telling you for years, everybody who's watching, that it is an apartheid, but you don't want to hear us, but you want to hear some white or like Israeli organizations also saying to you, no, we are living in an apartheid state. This is not how do we feel that we want to treat it. I actually want to be heard for real. We want to be visible and clearly visible. We want political decision that actually impact our life, change our life, and that we feel that we are part of this humanity. And actually, Palestine in general proved very much a huge failure in all the political involvement with to give any rights to the Palestinians. And clearly in Germany, we see how our community is very repressed, suppressed, censored, silenced, invisible because of the German and the European treatment. And actually, Germany is one of the most complicit countries, and its people has to really act against its own state, because what's happening is a clear complicity and a clear violations of freedom of expression that we as Palestinians we disagree with. Therefore, I kind of very much want to center a lot political mobilizing for Palestine, in Germany and beyond Germany, that Palestinian can be very much an autonomous people with all their full rights guaranteed, by all the nations, state, and all the people around. So I would say let's mobilize for our Palestinian political rights as most important. Plus, it's very important to keep on supplying the Palestinian with lots of power and material so they can fight this Israeli colonialism and apartheid. Thank you.
Fantastic, great, Majed, thank you. There is like 1 or 2 questions in the chat, but we are quite over time now, so I would suggest that we park them. I think some of them can actually be answered if you go a little bit back to the video before and you rewatch some of the questions that we had in the beginning. You'll probably find those answers. I want to send a big thank you to Ghada, and also to Majed. Thanks for participating. Please, let's stay in touch, and maybe we can talk about the situation in 3 months and have a bit better news. Let's keep some information flowing there, because as it's said also by one of the commentators here, especially in Germany, this kind of information is basically unattainable unless you have personal contacts. So I think even we're a little podcast, but just by having the information that you laid out here, and even the opinions that you laid out here, we're already making a huge dent in the media landscape here. So thanks a lot for making that possible. It's hugely important to me, and yeah, I hope it does something to the case. So I wish you a very nice evening. Please take care of yourself, stay healthy, and let's talk soon. All right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Nadim.
Thank you, Nadim. Thank you, everybody. Yeah.